So how does it feel right now? Ask yourself this question. How do you feel right now that everything's working out for you perfectly? And you have $30 million in cash on your kitchen table right now in stacks. You can feel it, you can see it, you can touch it. All of these things, it's yours right now. How does that feel right now? Like, how do you truly express that to me? I want you to express how that truly feels, that you are now rich and successful, financially free. You can help all these different people. You can help all of your family, all of your friends. You can buy your favorite car. You can buy a boat. You can buy a jet. You can travel the world. You can donate to your favorite charity. You can do whatever you want with your money. You're financially set. I mean, how does this feel? And this is what I want to cover in this video, because temporary states of consciousness create permanent states of consciousness. So if you make this a repetition, you create an exercise out of this, and you are consistent with this temporary, like when you ask yourself, like just now, you created a temporary state of consciousness right now with me. You know, as I was asking you those questions, you were picturing yourself, you know, the things that you would be doing with your friends, with your family, the cars, the health, everything. So when I was asking you that, you were actually creating new temporary states of consciousness, because you were down here, and then as soon as I asked you that, you went up here. But when you look away from the mirror later, when you go back to your everyday life, or after this video, you're going to come back down to ground level, to your old states of consciousness. But as you develop this and keep doing it, keep raising these temporary states of consciousness, eventually they become permanent states of consciousness. And that's what I really wanted to cover in this video, because how impactful this is, and how Neville Goddard unpacked this, or this is what he came up with, his philosophy of creating a temporary state of consciousness, a new concept of self, as you're falling asleep at night. So as you create this new version of yourself, of climbing a ladder or doing something, and then you fall asleep in this temporary feeling state, then you impress that, you fall asleep, you go into the drift, you go into sats with this temporary feeling state or state of consciousness, and then you impress the subconscious mind with this new state. And then you wake up in the morning, and then it becomes a permanent state of consciousness. And that's the magic that Neville Goddard discovered through experience, and we have discovered through experience, is so you can decide whatever you want to create in your life. Anything that you want to create in your life, you just have to ask yourself the question, or see what it looks like in your own imagination. What does this look like? What would I be doing if I had this? Like, and how would that truly feel? And then that state of consciousness then creates the temporary state that you need to be in as you're falling asleep. But you can do this throughout the day and create these temporary states, and they become permanent, because as you keep doing it through repetition, if you don't have the ability to hold your attention on a feeling state, you can do this through repetition, and it will happen to you. You know, this may take a little bit more time, but what Neville Goddard was teaching was having a direct, having a controlled, developed attention with present moment awareness, to where you can capture a feeling and really grab a hold of it, and then fall asleep with it. That creates a permanent state of consciousness. And that's what Neville Goddard coined, by feeling is the secret, and what you fall asleep with creates your reality, from the imagination pushed out into the world. But you can develop this, with practice throughout the day, creating these temporary states of consciousness. So make it a habit. Make it a habit throughout the day. Set timers if you have to. Write down notes. Do something where you create this temporary state of consciousness in the morning when you wake up, and later in the morning, a couple times here and there. Every time you have a free moment, you're creating these feeling states, and you're developing this habit too of developing this temporary state of consciousness into a permanent state of consciousness. Because if you do this 100 times throughout the day, you're going to be so close to that permanent state. By the time you fall asleep, you're not going to have to do anything. You're not going to have to create a feeling state, because you're already in it if you do it enough. So the decision is yours. The decision is yours. I'm just here to guide you. I'm just here to tell you how it all works, but it's up to you for the application. I mean, I can shift your state of consciousness while you're watching this video by just simply asking you a question. What do you desire? What do you want to have in your life? So now imagine yourself having that. Ask yourself, how would you feel right now if you had the physique of your dreams, the relationship of your dreams, the house of your dreams, the car of your dreams? You're able to travel the world. You're financially free. You can do whatever you want right now. How does that feel? That gave you because when I asked you that, you automatically started picturing this stuff in your imagination. Imagination creates reality. Okay, so you automatically, from the visual scene in your mind, from the questions that I asked you and you started asking yourself, that created a picture in your mind of the end. Okay, the end, and when you felt the end, it created a new state of consciousness, all right? And as you develop this over time, it becomes permanent states of consciousness. But one other thing you have to understand is you don't have free will to act outside of your current state of consciousness. So even like I was talking to one of my clients, I'm building a brand for one of my clients. And what I told him to do before he creates his videos for YouTube or Instagram or whatever, I say, get into this feeling, okay? Get into this feeling and see yourself at 100,000 subscribers or 1 million or whatever you want to create, and really submerge yourself in this feeling, and then turn the camera on. And then come up with an idea for content at that point, because you're putting yourself in that flow state. You're raising your states of consciousness temporarily, but in that temporary state of consciousness, you're coming up with an idea to reach 100,000 people because you just felt yourself, because that's the state of consciousness that you just traveled to. You just went to that state of consciousness where you now have 100,000 subscribers. So in that state of consciousness, you were able to come up with an idea to attract 100,000 people. So whatever idea that came to your mind from that state of consciousness is going to attract that thing. Okay, so remember that that's how this works. These temporary states of consciousness actually create just that. Because you cannot act outside of your current state of consciousness. Okay, so as you raise your states of consciousness, you get new ideas that are congruent with that state of consciousness that you just forced yourself into, or I wouldn't say force, but just kind of put yourself into, and brought it to you. So in that new state of consciousness, you now come up with an idea, and you're able to act, appropriately or congruently with that person that you've just created for that temporary amount of time. And you do this, and I started doing, this is how I created my YouTube channel, is I would see myself, first thing I did was I saw myself with 35,000 subscribers, which isn't a whole lot, but I was able to get it in a short amount of time because I put myself into that temporary state of consciousness right before I shot my video, right before I came up with the idea, because I didn't have an idea before that. The idea that I would have had prior to that state of consciousness wouldn't have attracted the audience that I was looking for, the amount of people, because my old state of consciousness didn't have an audience. My new state of consciousness, the temporary one that I created, already had 35,000. So in that state of consciousness, I created an idea for content that was going to reach that 35,000 people, or however many people that were going to subscribe, probably 5 times that. So understanding how states of consciousness work and your free will to act is all based on your current state of consciousness, but you can pull yourself out of your current state of consciousness by going within. That's where free will exists, is within you, within that state of consciousness. But you can get out of your state of consciousness because your body isn't you, and you are able to observe your thoughts from the outside, so you can change from the inside out and come up with new ideas from the internal state that you have created. I know it could be a little bit technical, a lot of variables with it, but I think you get the gist of this, okay? And that's why Neville Goddard coined this whole idea and came up with this thesis, of falling asleep with a temporary state of consciousness, with already having the things that you want to have. Okay, you already have what you want to have, and you create that, and you raise yourself up, and you not excitedly, like I'm kind of getting excited about talking about it, but you don't get excited like that as you go to sleep. You create the natural emotion of that already being done as you're falling asleep, and the subconscious mind can feel that. So that temporary state of consciousness that you went into now is a permanent state, because when you went into the subconscious with the temporary state, it then was impressed into the subconscious, and then when you came out and woke up the next day, is now a permanent state of consciousness. You see what I'm saying? So that is what Neville Goddard found with practicing falling asleep and with the subconscious and with SATS, the state akin to sleep. That little loophole, that little hack in between, because everyone is consciously or unconsciously, sometimes consciously, but unintentionally creating, states of consciousness, and they're growing manually by doing certain things within themselves, like pushing themselves to get out of their comfort zones and then raising themselves through obstacles and difficulties. That is they're imagining themselves being better as they're doing that. That's what creates the state of consciousness that they're in order to act differently and create things. But as you understand the internal world, you can actually manipulate the simulation by creating and manipulating your own states of consciousness by asking yourself questions and creating these feeling states, even though they're just temporary. Even though they're just temporary states of consciousness, they eventually turn to permanent states of consciousness, which is, the really fun part about this. It's absolutely amazing if you can do this. And the more you have control over the direction of your attention and present moment awareness, is the easier that this becomes. And that's why within my school community, I have an entire course designed around specifically and strategically and systematically gaining your attention and then present moment awareness, knowing you're living in a simulation, doing the ladder exercise and developing yourself into this person now that has the direction of your attention and present moment awareness. Because if you create a temporary state of consciousness to where you have $30 million and you have control of the direction of your attention and you have present moment awareness with this, you will be able to hold on to it much more simple as you're falling asleep, because that's really the most difficult time to do it, that Neville Goddard didn't talk about. Because as you're getting into that relaxed state, where you're not conscious but you're not unconscious, but you still have control of the direction of your attention to manipulate your states of consciousness, like during that entire process. And that's what Neville Goddard covered. And that's why I came up with this, because through experience, this is what I've found was the reason why I couldn't do it before, is because I didn't have a well-developed attention, and I was so hooked on dopamine, all this social media, all this, food that was just spiking my insulin and causing mood disorders. I was on medication. I had ADHD, ADD. I was on medication. I was on all these different things, right? So, and what I found is after developing my attention and present moment awareness, I no longer had these issues. They all went bye-bye, okay? They all just gone, like that. No more ADHD, no more ADD, no more post-traumatic stress disorder. No, that stuff didn't exist, okay? It wasn't real. Just like your simulation now. None of it's real. It's all being created from within you. And there's going to be a very good reason the doctor can explain to you why you have all this, because this, and this happened, and this happened, and that's why you have this. But really, it's all within you. And when you gain control of the direction of your attention with present moment awareness, you can do anything. There's nothing that you cannot do. And that's why I get kind of excited about talking about this stuff, because I've experienced it to be true, and I want to share this knowledge. Inevitably or ultimately, it's up to you whether you're going to use the knowledge that I'm giving you now and put it in and make the decision to put it in application. Put it in application form, holding yourself accountable. Holding yourself accountable is very important. And this is something that I don't need an accountability partner or a coach or anything like that. I have other coaches and things like that, but I don't need an accountability coach to make sure I do certain things. Because I trained myself when I was in prison, being institutionalized and being a non-negotiable person. Oh, sorry about that. I missed the camera up. All right, there we go. Okay, so I trained myself to be a non-negotiable person, to where if I tell myself I'm going to do certain things throughout the day, there's nothing that can stop me from doing that. I could have, there could be a hurricane that comes through and destroys my whole house. I'm going to be in the backyard shooting this video if I wrote down that I was going to make this video. I'm going to find a way to make it, and I'm going to find a way to get back to that state of consciousness, because you don't want to lose those states of consciousness, because they can go backwards just as quickly as they can go forwards. So, and as I make content, I stay in my states of consciousness as well. So it doesn't matter if I write something down or I tell myself I'm going to do something. I'm non-negotiable about doing that, unless it's something that I absolutely cannot control. Then that's the only way that I won't be done. And I've trained myself this way. That's why I don't really need an accountability partner. I trained myself almost 10 years doing these things, being institutionalized or whatever they want to call it, things like that. Most people don't have that. They never experienced that. So they've been doing these things for so long, to where they tell themselves they're going to do things and they only do half of them, and then they develop that state of consciousness, and it's a revolving door to where they just stay in that state until they have someone push them out. Like what happened to me. Like, I was that concept of self until I went to prison, and then I changed it all, by reading all the books of the greats, focusing, doing meditation, shifting my states of consciousness, learning how to control the direction of my attention, my present moment awareness, knowing I'm living in a simulation. All these things has really contributed to that. And then I just made a decision ultimately that everything that I said I was going to do, I'm going to do. And that ultimately creates you know, a new version of me that no longer needs an accountability, you know, partner or anyone that's holding me accountable for things, because I learned how to do it all on my own. You know, and sometimes it can take a little bit of push where you need an accountability partner in order to get you to that new state of consciousness. And eventually you don't need an accountability partner, but sometimes at first it can be a little bit helpful, or getting content like this where I'm explaining this to you and how you just need to start applying that. Change your states of consciousness. Start whatever you write down, make sure you do it. Make sure you do it, because you will be successful. And that ultimately changes who you are and your states of consciousness, just by being a person that always does what they say they're going to do. Whatever you tell yourself, just make sure you do those things. All right. So remember, temporary states of consciousness lead to permanent states of consciousness. And as you control your direction of your attention and develop that in present moment awareness, you can create this temporary state of consciousness and then fall asleep with it much more simple. Or you can do it throughout the day through repetition, and eventually the temporary state will become a permanent state of consciousness. So always ask yourself, always keep bringing this back up, these questions back up, and these imaginal acts back up. How would you feel if you already had the things that you desired to have? How would you feel? How would I feel right now? What would I be doing right now? How would I act? How would I dress? How would I talk? How would I walk? You know, just run this stuff through your head and start visualizing yourself doing these things. And that's the temporary state of consciousness that will eventually turn into a permanent state of consciousness. All right, I love you guys. Whew. I love you guys, and I really want you to make the decision to do this. And I keep making these videos. I know I keep hitting on that, but I've experienced this stuff. So, all right, guys, I love you. I'll see you in the next one.